and welcome to another episode of Smart Talk. We are continuing our discussion from the previous episode, part one of how liberals have betrayed the Black struggle in America. In the last episode, we went through the civil rights movement, the Panthers, and ended with Reagan and the reactionary period that ensued, marked both by the decline of the Black struggle as well as a smashing of the labor movement. In this episode, we're going to pick up that discussion and we're going to start at the outset of the post-Soviet period and the coming to power of Clinton, who has been dubbed, and I quote, the first Black president. So back with me is Cairo. Welcome back.
Hey.
Hi. Okay, so let's pick up, as I said, with Clinton. Why I decided to, not just because the previous one was an hour long, but why I also decided to take a sort of pause there is this was a changed situation internationally. The Soviet Union is no more after 1991, and this changes things for the US, which is now top dog in the world, doesn't have a sort of counter to its hegemony in the world. And that ends up having an impact in terms of the dominant ideologies and how that filters down into the working class, into the Black struggle, or the lack of Black struggle, but into the fight against racism, let's say. So let's pick up from that changed context. Take us through what this meant.
Yeah, so with the fall of the Soviet Union, the US became hegemonic, main world superpower, and no longer had to compete with the Soviet Union. It was dubbed like the death of communism, and the US was now able to basically pillage the whole world without any fight back, basically, from another superpower. And with this world triumphalism, where liberal capitalism was deemed like the pinnacle, that this was the thing to live up to, that this was like the natural order of things. With this in mind, suddenly U.S. imperialism, took a different face. It was now able to stick its hands everywhere on the globe under the guise of like quote unquote progressive politics, like human rights imperialism. Like you're going into a country to help, the poor, defenseless people there. You're going to get them rights, whatever. You're going to just help the people.
Save the women.
The U.S. Save the women. The U.S. became like the top cop of the world, and they were going to go around and, fix everything. But, this was a guise to hide that the U.S. was, pushing their own agenda and all across the globe, So this is what we call, when we talk about like the rise of the liberal world order. This is really where it started, Oh yes, okay, so that's the beginning of the 90s there, the global context. And what was happening here was that Bill Clinton was elected. And how this all gets reflected at home is that no longer did the imperialists need like such a tough face like Reagan, like a total reactionary, like a guy who was just gonna, spit on you and openly crush you and all this other stuff. They put in Clinton, and when people think about Bill Clinton now, it's very easy for people to hate him. He's signed the crime bill. He carried on mass incarceration. He ended welfare as we know it. But yes, all those things did happen. But what also happened was he was putting on a different face than Reagan. Like you said, he was deemed the first Black president because he went on Arsenio Hall and played the saxophone. And he didn't, he was like empathetic to the problems of Black people. And he also pushed ideas like multiculturalism, how that helps, like all the different cultures in America, helped with the opening up of the world. Like we are open to different cultures and different peoples,
Yeah. If I can just, actually, you have this great but also cringe quote from State of the Union address from Clinton in 2000. Mm-hmm. I want to just read it out to really give a sense for like, this sounds crazy. Like, from the standpoint of 2026, sounds crazy. But anyways, this is Clinton in 2000 from his State of the Union address. He said, "Within 10 years, there will be no majority race in our largest state, California. In a little more than 50 years, there will be no majority race in America. In a more interconnected world, this diversity can be our greatest strength. Just look around this chamber. We have members from virtually every racial, ethnic, and religious background, and America is stronger for it. And this actually took me way back to school because, so growing up in English Canada, we were always taught, in whatever our social sciences classes, like, oh, Canada's multicultural and America is a melting pot. These two different conceptions of like what immigration looks like. But this really embodies it. Like, oh, everybody come, world without borders, come, you're welcome into this melting pot, and everybody's like a American, and this is everybody can have the American dream. This like took me right back to that, and that goes hard because what Clinton is saying out here, is filtered down into the brains of like everybody in the country through like the curriculum, through the schools, through everything, But anyways, that took me way back to high school.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the whole like, America's a melting pot and all that. This really started with the Clinton era, Like previously, before this, like differences like underrated, like it needed to be like stomped out. Like it wasn't celebrated. It wasn't. They needed like a strict American identity. Like this is what America is, and if you try to say it's something else, then you're anti-American, and you need to be stomped out, basically. While Clinton, because of the new international situations, actually embraced this idea of diversity, multiculturalism, whatnot, because it helped with what they were doing, with the interest in the imperialists and extending themselves globally, and it helped them to be seen as like a diverse, nice country, and be appealing to, all the countries that are going around pillaging under the guise of, liberalism. So that's very interesting, and also like this really laid the basis of the ruling class really embracing identity politics, like, because people like to think like these things, whatever, like multiculturalism, diversity, identity politics, whatever the word you want to use, is like, again, just a nice idea in people's heads. Like it comes from nowhere. It's just you're a good person. You say these things, but it actually reflects the ideology of the ruling class at a time, And what that means is that they're using these things in order to better attack minorities, better attack, the rest of the world. And I just think that's really important to understand, because a lot of people are like, well, what's wrong with these nice things? It's like, it's not wrong to want to fight for Black people or whatever, but you have to understand that the ruling class is using this as a cover in order to better tie you back to it, in order to make you fight whatever the bad ideas in people's heads instead of fighting them.
No, 100%. In fact, I think it's some of the most difficult stuff to argue against. I think identity politics, less so now just because it's no longer, in fashion. Even the left criticizes it in their own way and so on. But I know, speaking from my own experiences, immigrant family, and I've tried to make points about like what's wrong with multiculturalism and how that totally, it isn't because all of a sudden the Canadian ruling class is just all like, hey, we love the world and everybody come on in and welcome. But, my family is so like, they're the biggest champions of multiculturalism. And in a sense, I understand that because they are immigrants in a white country. Like, I get it, But it's like, I think one of the most potent things that the ruling class in the post-Soviet period has been able to do is actually take, put on this sort of like progressive veneer and push all this like woke liberal politics, which goes deep into, it's sort of penetrated like, throughout like the labor movement, the left and so on. And it's really difficult to actually expose, as you just said, I think like the cover that the ruling class uses. I think it's something that makes sense to us. And I think like probably as a world situation turns and gets worse in the coming period, it's going to become clearer what, all these sort of nice woke ideologies are like in reality. But I do think that that's, difficult.
Yeah, and I think it is difficult, but I also think it's very important to like take this on. Like I was saying at the beginning too, like people like, oh, Clinton sucks because he did the crime bill and he did all these other things. And while that's true, I feel like a lot of people can't take on like the other stuff that he did. Before like writing this article, I didn't even know like that Clinton did all this stuff and that's where he came from, and like, because that's never talked about. It's always like the bad stuff. But I also think people also see this stuff as like the good stuff, that Clinton did.
Exactly.
And it's not something you need to criticize or talk about or whatever.
Precisely. And I think this is a problem with how the left usually approaches this. Is like you make as long a list as possible of all the crimes, and then you make some sort of a concession to the good sort of, the positive steps that, were taken by the government in any given time. But actually the task really is to show how both of those things come out from the actual political interests and the material needs of the ruling class at a given time. And I think I just want to link it back to the previous episode about the method, how you really have to link it to what's going on, what are their needs. And we see then the post-Soviet period, they don't have this challenger in the world anymore. And they can go around parading they're like the, saviors of the world and so on. And obviously it suits their aim, pillaging every other country, expanding the reach of finance capital. It suits them to actually put on those progressive clothes at home too. So yeah. So how did this go down when it comes to the labor movement? What was the impact of liberalism becoming the dominant ideology in terms of the labor movement?
Yeah, with the labor movement, they also put on a new face as well. I feel like John Sweeney he was the head of the AFL-CIO started in 1995. When he came in, it really was a real mirror to Clinton, how the AFL-CIO just became, super liberal, super progressive now. They had more Black, upper leadership now, even though in reality union density was falling. Black people weren't being that integrated into the unions, But again, it's symbolic, where we have another Black boss, or we have another Black union head. So
Black faces in high places.
Yeah, exactly. That's how we're going to do it. And we'll talk about, the human rights and whatnot. But at the same time, in the 90s, while that was happening, there were massive attacks on the labor movement. NAFTA was being put in. The U.S. was rewriting the whole world to was bent to its interests. And there was not that much fight against this. While, there were union leaders that were very upset about NAFTA and they could, say some words about it, they did not organize, a real fight to keep American jobs. That didn't happen. There wasn't a fight against Clinton doing this. So while, again, the union leaders can say some nice progressive things, in reality, the working class is being attacked. And again, they weren't fighting for them because they refused to fight against the U.S. ruling class.
So there wasn't a lot of Black struggle, but you talk about Farrakhan, which is the Nation of Islam, and the biggest Black movement, you say, in the 90s was the Nation of Islam's Million Man March. How does this fit into what we're talking about in terms of, we had the 80s is a real period of decline for the Black struggle, but then all of a sudden you see this. I'm not actually that familiar with the Farrakhan movement. What exactly was a character of this, and how did the changing world situation, I guess, color that? I mean, first of all, I'd just say it's called a Million Man March. What's up with that?
Yeah, so the Million Man March was kind of a big deal in the 90s. This thing, for decades now, there hasn't been some mass Black struggle thing going on. And it was led by Louis Farrakhan, who was part of the Nation of Islam. And the reason this happened, I think, one, like I said before, there wasn't a real big Black figurehead, for a while. Farrakhan was kind of filling that spot at this time. And two, there was just so much going on in the Black community. The Black community was just being beat down for a while now. Going from Reagan, and then who was just going after them, and then mass incarceration, communities are destroyed by, factories leaving, and neoliberal policies. Police brutality still run rampant. Rodney King was just beaten in LA, So there was the Black community really needed someone to do something about this. And then that's kind of where Farrakhan comes in, He's organizing this Million Man March. It's called the Million Man March too, because it was just for Black men. Women weren't allowed to go. And it was under the guise of taking Black men need to take responsibility and atonement and whatever, because
Atonement for what?
all the bad things Black people do, I guess. It goes back to the idea that the Black community is in this spot not because of the material basis of Black oppression, but because of bad ideas in Black people's heads. Like, Black people are messing up the Black community. There's absent fathers, and we have to take responsibility and atone. And a lot of this this rhetoric also kind of reflects the rhetoric of the ruling class, because it started under Reagan. This ideological shift from the government needs to take care of you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and take personal responsibility. And Clinton also echoed all these things as well about responsibility. So that was the main theme of the Million Man March, was Black men taking responsibility for the community and atoning. We'll fix ourselves, basically. And even though this sounds really whoa, why would anyone like this? But it had a real resonance, because Black people saw their communities and they're like, something needs to change. And while not every single person there was yeah, atonement, whatever, but it was seen as this is a way to bring back pride in our communities, for us to do something, for us to try to make things better. And I think almost 1 million people did come to that march, and they marched on Washington. So yeah, that was a pretty big deal for the 90s. But again, it kind of goes back to how these things are in a bubble. It was with the context of the domination of liberalism, the fall of the Soviet Union. There's this new ideology that's came in with Reagan, that's pull yourself up by your bootstraps, take personal responsibility. And you could see that reflected in the Million Man March, and also reflected today. If you talk to Black people today, and a very common thing is Black people don't support each other enough. Black people don't, take enough responsibility. We don't do this. We don't do that. It's always the blame on Black people as individuals not having the right ideas. You can't do it right. There's something just inherently wrong with Black people, but not that. No, Black oppression is not because Black people are just bad people. It's because, again, of the U.S. ruling class that has put Black people into these terrible conditions, and terrible conditions does cause weird social stuff to happen, so it's not just, again, it's not, I keep saying this a lot, but I think it's just important to say it's not about bad ideas in people's heads. I think a lot of people think that. It's about, the ruling class literally forcibly segregating Black people in this society. This is where this oppression comes from. And if you're not fighting against that, it's, again, going to just be, on the side of Black people blame themselves, I feel it's a lot of victim blaming, It's just if they're at fault, when it's this racist ruling class that's at fault,
I mean, on one level, I like the phrase you just used, victim blaming, but it really shows you the sense of defeat and demoralization to turn inwards when the society you live in is so brutally racist, and then, in fact, the response is to turn inwards and, find problems within, as opposed to what's wrong with the society out there. It's quite heartbreaking on one level.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can see the despair in that. Yeah.
And also another reason where this comes from too is, I think, because of the defeat of the civil rights movement and the whole backlash to it. Because with the civil rights movement, we got, formal equality, and that has been used against Black people forever. Whether you see in the racist backlash that happens in the 70s and 80s and whatnot, or even today, it's you have formal equality. You pass all these civil rights acts, you got what you wanted. You're all equal. So why can't you
complaining?
Do it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is your community still like this? Why are Black people still in jail? It's you have all the legal equality in the world. So there's something must be wrong with you. You're not doing something right,
Yeah. You're not working hard enough to pass school and get good grades so you can go to the best university and get the best jobs out there. Meanwhile, you don't look at the state of schools in the ghettos,
Yeah.
And the housing and everything else. Yeah. I think, again, it's a point you made at the start of our last discussion about the source of Black oppression, the betrayal by the Northern capitalists of the Black struggle, how this was really rooted in their material interest, because they realized that this is going to be good for them to keep the whole working class down. And you see this, I think, again and again and again. Like this is just such a reality of American life.
It is like, this is like, the capitalists are very happy because they keep Black people and white people, whatever, just at each other's throats because it's such a useful tool for them. Like, even like the whole concept of race, like when I was first like learned, when I became political, that race, like wasn't a thing really before slavery. It was like, what are you talking about? Because all of America's society is defined by race. Like my whole life is defined by being Black. So like to think that this is not just a, inherent thing, that this is used as a tool by the capitalist is like, like, whoa, what the hell? So like, yeah, like all of American society has been like defined by this. And we say it's like, race has disfigured American society, and you could see that like every day.
Yeah. I guess this is a good transition to the post-racial society.
Yes.
Because now we're talking about the election of Obama, which was a huge watershed moment. I think this is around the time when I started to actually pay attention to the news in my life. Okay, so post-racial society. Let's talk about Obama. The world looked very different. You had a Black president. So what did... Yeah. Take us through that.
Yeah, like in 2008, man, this was like the thing. Like I remember I was pretty young when it happened. I wasn't like fully conscious, but I remember people crying in the streets and stuff like that. Like Obama was like this historic watershed moment, like that no one thought possible, in this racist society, that they would ever allow a Black man to be in the White House, like absolutely ever. But it happened with Obama. And I think it's important to understand exactly why the ruling class like allowed this. And it wasn't because suddenly they're like, oh, we love Black people now, but there was a crisis happening. 2008 was really the first cracks in the new liberal world order that we've been talking about. Like it was the 2008 financial crisis really hit, and it hit really hard. Millions of people's lost their homes, jobs, whatnot. And then, it was just complete devastation for like the working class Black people, just like a lot of the masses. And the ruling class needed to do something because they really needed to pacify the masses. If not, things might have gone crazy for them. So they let Obama win the presidency, basically. They let him come in, and his whole job was to, pacify the masses, keep things calm, and bail out the banks, and try to create some stability off the backs of the working class. And Obama himself, represented, like embodied, like these new liberal politics, like that we were talking about, us coming about. Like America was oh so progressive. It was amazing that we got our first Black president now, even though the first Black president's job was to oversee basically the devastation after this crisis. And it didn't work for a bit, because it wasn't just like, oh, first Black president. Like it was like a huge moment, like especially for like the Black community. The Black community was so proud of Obama. Like you said, when you look back now, it's easy to go, Obama, oh, he did drone strikes and he didn't do much for Black people and he didn't, do X, Y, and Z. But at the time, it was like everyone felt his like campaign, the hope and change stuff, that he was Black in the White House, that we made it. This was like a whole, like, it was like a racial pride thing. Like we were able to accomplish this. Like Black people were going to be in a better spot because of this. We've made it so far. And Obama's whole thing too was now that we live in a post-racial society, we're 90% there. If we could get a Black man in the White House, we can do anything. And so that held, people over for a little bit. Like it wasn't even just Black people who loved him. There was a bunch of white people who loved him too. They were like, oh my God, we did it. Yeah. So, but it kind of like, I think it's obvious to everyone now that Obama's election did not get rid of racism or fix Black oppression at all. Like he didn't really do anything for Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And really what it was, like I was saying, was a means for the ruling class to like pull a bait and switch on you. Be like, oh, we destroyed your life, but oh, here's the black president, Like pay
Yep.
attention to that instead.
Yeah. I want to just pick up a little bit from what you write in your article here, because it kind of really shows you both in terms of how Obama really served the interests of the ruling class, but also the problem of the left. So you talk about how, a black man overseeing the carnage was a perfect ploy, as you've sort of explained, but also that, he presided over bailing out the big banks, rising poverty, et cetera, et cetera. His list of crimes is huge, but all kinds of excuses were made from like the liberals all the way to the left, and passes were given in no small part because of liberal identity politics. Like you cannot criticize a black president. Why? Because otherwise, what you're racist.
You're racist. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it really shows you how effective Obama was in terms of like calming down this tough situation that the American ruling class found itself in.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Because even today, while there are more criticisms of Obama today, it's still not as much as like Bush or whatever. You know what I mean? Obama's still pretty loved, I would say, by like
Oh,
regular
really?
people. Yeah. And especially the black community still like it. There are people who say Obama didn't do nothing for us, but it's still like he's not as hated as like a lot of these other presidents now. And especially not at the time. He was you couldn't criticize him because then you're a racist.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I want to take a step back and like talk about liberalism, like touch back on the main point of the article, right? So we've been sort of talking, we started off way in the late 50s and the 60s, and now all the way we're in the 2000s. What's been constant is liberalism, but how it changes. Liberalism looks different in terms of the different periods, but each time it's the interests of the black people, the aspirations of black people are used in a cynical way by the ruling class to just stab them in the back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we mean by liberalism. Like it's constantly tying the black struggle, most of the time under like a progressive veneer, back to the same class that needs their oppression. Like I think Obama's a good example. Like it was able to really like pacify the anger a lot of black people had because we have a black president. Isn't this great? You lost your home or your job, but we have a black president.
Yeah. And I think the point about revolutionary integrationism that we touched on in the last episode, that there is a shared material interest in terms of the working class being the best ally, because both the black liberation struggle and the working class have a shared interest in overthrowing the ruling class. Like what liberalism actually does is it makes these racial divisions worse. And what we see by the end of Obama is actually the growth of MAGA. So we're now like really seeing the situation turn to the worse in terms of how the decades of like liberalism being the dominant program of the black struggle farther sort of isolate the black struggle. Do you think that's the correct way of putting it? Like how liberalism isolated the black struggle?
Yeah, it really like as we're probably gonna go on and talk about, but like how it really like just breeds backlash, and makes people like not see the black struggle as something that is compatible with their own struggle. It's actually like seen as against their struggle.
Yeah. So let's talk about like how liberalism is actually the program that led to Trump and the worsening conditions and political, weakness of the farther political weakness of the black movement. So how does Obama lead to Trump? How do we go from post-racial society to MAGA?
Yeah, so with Obama, like we were talking about, he's overseeing the financial crisis, bailing out the banks on the backs of like the working class and black people and poor. And the financial situation for the American working class is just getting worse, basically, since 2008. But with that also was that, ideological guise of liberalism is also getting more and more amped up as the years went on. So economic conditions were worsening, quote unquote, woke politics were getting more and more. That often blamed, white people, white workers for racial oppression, all part of the ills of society, and kind of beat this like moral I don't know, thing onto them that you have to like feel bad for the oppressed. How can you not care about the oppressed while their own conditions were worsening? And if you say anything about it, then you're just, some backward worker or whatever. So they really sets the stage for like MAGA because, the liberal world order was, beginning to decline as well. It's not having as much to give back to the actual working class here. And like I said, people were getting kind of fed up with like the liberal moralizing that was happening while their economic conditions were going down. So this gave Trump, when he came in, like this in the 2016 elections, like a really good hearing. And everybody was really surprised when Trump got elected the first time because he was like seen as an anomaly and like kind of against everything like the liberal world order was, you know? One, he wanted to tear it up, but also two, he was like this brazen, crude guy who the liberals hated. And how liberalism fueled divisions during this period was like, if you supported Trump in any way, it doesn't matter what reason, you were just a white supremacist, you were a fascist, you were a racist,
Mhm.
Um, there could be no contradiction, there could be no reason. It was just that. And if you didn't support the liberals and, their resistance, then basically you should be banished from society. Basically, you should be executed.
Right.
So that's really kind of how 2016 was playing out. Like it was very hysterical against that. The liberals went into like high gear to like get out the quote unquote fascists in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
But really, and like, they presented themselves as fighting for like minorities, women, whatever. But what this was doing, with whatever the resistance was doing, was only furthering the racial divide. It's trying to paint Trump supporters as nothing but like deplorable human beings, and they're like the saviors of Black people, minorities, women. So they further the racial divide, further dividing like the working class to was the only, like as we're saying, the only real ally to the Black struggle, but also tying Black people back again to the liberal wing of the ruling class by making it seem like any white worker was just some racist piece of shit and you can't do anything with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if you can speak a little bit about like tying Black workers back to the Democratic Party, because famously it's a two-party system in the United States. So you want to fight the fascists in the White House, then you gotta go to the other guy. Like that is obviously the strategy, and there's a problem with that. But like, what's the answer? What do you do if you don't want to be the liberal, like the hysterical liberal, but like, what do you actually do to then fight Trump at that time?
Yeah, I think what needed to happen is the left needed to fight for like an independent movement that was not connected to, one wing of the ruling class to fight Trump. I'm not saying that's going to be an easy task. It's going to be a hard thing to build, but that's what's actually needed because you can't fight Trump like hand in hand with the liberals. Okay, you might get him out of office, which is what happened, but it doesn't stop, the rise of the right. It doesn't stop, racial oppression. It doesn't stop anything. It just, again, ends up tying the Black struggle again to a wing of the ruling class who, Democrats are very good at pretending to be your ally and then stabbing you in the back. It's like,
yeah. And I mean, we saw what happened,
yeah,
Biden came and now we have Trump again.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I wanted to ask that because this is what we see right now in maybe somewhat of a different way, but relating to some of the other work that you guys do in the US, it's the struggle in the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, because they're all like, well, we're the socialist wing of the Democratic Party. We're the socialist wing of the liberal imperialist party, and we're going to somehow transform the Democrats. And so the struggle, yes, it's a gigantic struggle. Okay. But like, what else are you going to do? Like literally, what else are you going to do? You need to fight for a third independent alternative, which is based on the working class. So all these other arguments about like how we're going to gradually transform the Democrats and I think that's like, yeah. Anyways,
I feel like if you look at history, like this article's trying to show like this liberal gradual thing that things are going to change. Like, no, it's not. Like it literally, like, all of history has shown that that's not happening. Can we try something else now? Like, can we actually do a different thing? The liberals have destroyed the Black struggle. And even looking at it, has what happened in 2016, this liberal resistance, put us in a better place today? Actually, no, it hasn't. It's only further the racial divide, made the left basically look like liberals, which a lot of them are. right now in the U.S., there is no third pole. There is no, thing between the Democrats and the Republicans. A lot of people don't see an alternative because one isn't built.
Mhm.
That's why the left really needs to learn the lessons of what happened, well, throughout history, but particularly in 2016, because Trump's back. And we can't just make another like resistance, that's led by liberals. Like you see all these No Kings protests and stuff like that, and there's leftists who are like, we need to build these protests. And I'm like, okay, yes, we need protests, but not under the same program that got us here. We need to fight against these people, and put another liberal in the White House again, so we can do this again and again. I feel like, come on, we got to wake up at a certain point and do the hard work that it takes to build an actual revolutionary party.
Mhm. Well, I think this brings me to BLM. Okay, we're still in the 2016s and so on, but
Mhm.
these were Black militants who wanted real change.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, today, as you said at the outset of the last episode, BLM basically doesn't exist. It
Mhm.
isn't there. We're not seeing BLM protests, but a number of years ago, this looked quite impressive. So,
Mhm.
what went wrong with BLM?
Yeah, I think it was the fundamental question. It's political leadership of the struggle. And a lot of people like to say the problem with BLM is the leadership was whatever, corrupt and used money to buy houses and whatnot. And maybe they did. But that isn't really the fundamental problem. Political. And like you're saying, there was a bunch of militants and people wanted to fight and were justifiably angry. But the dominant political trend of the movement was a liberal movement for cop reform. That was the dominant trend in the movement. It was trying to, you know, fight for different cop reform measures. The biggest one was defund the police. And what militants really needed to do was who didn't like this stuff, who didn't like, the Democrats or the capitalist system or hated the cops and whatever. Leftists needed to intersect these militants and fight for a break with the openly pro-capitalist wing of the movement. Needs to fight against the people who are calling for to vote for Biden to get out Trump the fascist and whatnot, and fight to win the most militant elements to a socialist program. Honestly,
Mhm.
to drive a wedge in this movement and fight for you know socialist politics to dominate the movement. Not just be a left tail and give suggestions or, oh, this isn't going to work, or you know lecture people on the nature of the capitalist state, but really show the politics that are dominating the movement right now are going to lead it to defeat.
Mhm.
You're not going to get what you want with these politics. There needs to be a fight against these politics for basically a new leadership of the movement.
Look, I know that this article just came out not too long ago, but I'm wondering if you've had experience arguing along those lines with BLM activists. What kind of I know you also mentioned okay, well, the leadership was corrupt, and yeah, they probably were, but I'm wondering does this have a resonance now that they see that their movement sort of went nowhere?
A little bit. I'm trying to think about the people I've argued with this about. Yeah, because the number one thing people say is the BLM incorporated people are bad, but it is difficult for people. Everyone knows BLM, is gone, but it's difficult for people to understand the why behind it.
Mhm.
And some people are they need to be more militant, they need to burn more stuff down, whatever. I'm okay, maybe, I don't know. But what needed to happen was a political break. I think that is a little difficult for people to understand, what that means, because I think it's kind of thinking outside of, I feel a lot of people have this the politics of the possible. Well,
Mhm.
this is what we just can do. What do you mean you could do
Yeah.
something else?
Yeah.
But I think that's, again, the job of the left to really win militants over to this perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, it's not easy, but to really kind of, I think it may come up clear more as struggle. Maybe if this is what we were trying to do, or if anyone on the left was trying to do at the time, it could have
Yeah.
been more clearly posed. I think at bottom, that's what we're always trying to. You always have to fight for this perspective.
Yeah. I think you put it quite nicely. Actually, that's exactly what I was thinking. We say this a lot in in our propaganda. Listeners are familiar. You got to break from this, you got to break from that. But I think the whole that what that means is very it's much clearer when there is an actual alternative. Like, hey,
Yeah.
don't do this one, do that one, and this is
Mm-hmm.
why. And these are the people who are going to help you do it. This is how to do it. You know, it's like it's
Mm-hmm.
much clearer when there's an actual alternative, which is the whole
Yeah.
point about like the left has got to get its shit together and like actually fight for that to exist.
Mm-hmm.
But that the left needs to draw its own lessons and do a lot of the work. I think it's kind of implicit. I think a lot of our listeners will probably know also. I mean, at the time that all this was happening, BLM, we were having our own problems, so we didn't really actively intervene. There was COVID and the lockdowns and everything going on, so that was happening. But we've done our work to draw those lessons, and should such a movement emerge again, we'll at least be in a better position to figure out what to do when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as you were saying with the no kings and like this and that and the other thing, it's like the left hasn't drawn those lessons, and it's either it's the politics of the possible and how to make that possible a little bit more left-wing sounding, or it's like you got to fight for socialism, like pie in the
Mm-hmm.
sky type of stuff. I wanted to actually just, since we're talking about BLM and the question of the police, cop reform, all of that's come up, mention in your article Mamdani. Yes, New York has a socialist, quote, socialist mayor who actually signed off to have a Zionist police commissioner. I guess I'm trying to get at push a bit of the point about like defund the police. Is that really still a thing? Like, do people still
Today?
Yeah.
No.
No? Oh, okay.
Not really.
Cool.
Well, I'm not gonna say maybe there's a couple people, but like majority wise, oh, not at all. It's really like
Okay.
I think everyone's really dropped any talk of that. With Mamdani, he actually was one of the few people who used to say it, back in the day, and then he had to running for mayor had to apologize for it or something, that he even said this. Oh, he loves the cops actually. I would never
Okay.
defund them.
I want to start, I guess, coming to actually, I mean, BLM led to Biden, right? Like the whole, well, not BLM per se, but the whole anti-Trump resistance meant putting
Mm-hmm.
Biden in the White House. And then Biden then gave us Trump and where we are today. So I guess for me, I'm wondering, I'm not sure if you have something specific to say about the Biden years, but stepping back again and looking at the state of the country, the lack of a movement for Black liberation.
Well, what Biden represented was really like a quote unquote return to normalcy, like Trump was just too crazy and we needed to get back to normal. And yeah, this is what the whole anti-Trump resistance was leading to, the reelection of Biden, and same with BLM. And when we say, and I say that how BLM led to Biden, isn't consciously oh, all these voters were like, yeah, we love Biden, as with liberal politics is in the driver's seat. This was the logical conclusion of where to go, It's not a coincidence or something that BLM basically ended after Biden was elected. Cop killings didn't stop, but there was no more protests in the streets, But also most significant of the Biden presidency was that it really kind of solidified basically that Trump was just going to crush the liberal world order, basically. That this was kind of it's on its last legs, even though, I don't know, I guess the liberals thought Biden would try, but he was not going to be able to fix it. What he was doing was from COVID to the war in Ukraine to the genocide in Gaza to all that, the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. All these things were just kind of accelerating the trends that were undermining the liberal world order. At the same time, economic conditions still weren't great. Biden couldn't do his little Bidenomics thing and bring relief to the masses. And for the Black struggle, I don't think even Biden promised that much. DEI escalated during the Biden years, but that was kind of about it. But that was really kind of the Biden presidency. A thing that also happened to the Biden presidency, which I find a little more interesting than Biden himself, was the strike wave that started happening after COVID. And how, again, this is the question, how labor and Black rights either go forward together or backward, because there was, movement in the labor movement, and people wanted to fight back against, they've just been squeezed and really had to be dragged in the dirt between the economic crisis that were happening on the pandemic, and they came out wanting to fight. We need something. And the one we talk about in the article is the UAW strike, and how this had massive potential to not just turn the tide for the working class, but also turn the tide for the Black population as well. If, the fight for Black liberation was put at the center of the strikes struggle, but that's not what happened. Sean Fain, who is the top of the UAW, kind of refused to do that. Again, deeming these topics as like divisive, and we just have to stay to economic issues, even though the strike was taking place in like Black Detroit, where there's a majority Black workers, Black neighborhoods, like everything. I really could have gallivanted the whole like population behind the union, if it took up these questions. But again, that's not what happened. The strike got partial demands for the UAW workers, and Detroit is still devastated.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate your point about, and we touched on this in the previous episode as well, about not picking up on, quote, divisive issues. See this anytime there's a struggle or a strike that involves minority workers, whether that's women or Black people or, in other countries, other groups of people, because the framework is you got to look at the common denominator, the lowest common denominator that unites everybody. Oh, we're all workers. Let's just fight for working class things. It's like, well, okay, but some workers are white and others are Black. And unfortunately, the Black workers feel a certain way. Why? Because, they might have the worst jobs or whatever. So you got to take that on board. You have to actually deal with that, and the way to deal with that is not to then pit it against the other white workers, but to show how that divided structure actually helps the boss at the end of the day. It's the same point you've been making about how the racial divisions have been so useful to the American ruling class. And it's the same thing inside a shop floor, inside a factory, inside a plant, whatever, even a school or whatever, that those divisions stay a useful tool to help the boss keep the working class divided. And then when the union bureaucracy then goes along with that, like, oh, we're just workers, don't worry, like you got to put the, your struggles as women, your struggles as Black people, the racism that you confront, all of that to the side, the lower wages you have, then that actually like fuels a lot of resentment, and that goes to the point about how the bureaucracy is like not actually having this like interest to, go against the bosses in a way that's gonna like make it hurt. But that's a common theme, I think, like when it comes to the different strikes that happen in terms of not putting the Black question at the heart of the strategy.
Yeah, that's a constant, I think, has been a failure on the part of like the union leadership for decades now to do this. And I also think it's also kind of a failure on the part of the left because the left either capitulates to liberalism, which just furthers the racial divide, and uses like a moral browbeating type thing, or which is more happening nowadays, it's just kind of dropping this question and being like class reductionist, and that we need to unite because you're all the same class, you're whatever, you're being Black, it doesn't matter, it's all the same. They can talk, of course the left is against racism and whatever. The fact that, the Black question is a special question as the thing you need to pick up and champion, like that's a really rare perspective. Like I talk to a lot of Black leftists who hate the left because they think it's so white and that nobody cares about like Black oppression. Like Black people have to drop like their whole identity, their whole everything in order to unite on the lowest common denominator, basically. And that causes resentment, and it makes people not think that the left has anything to give them,
Is the American left really white?
Oh yeah, super white.
Tell us more. I don't know. Like, I think that's interesting in terms of, like, I think for me, that's an illustration of how the socialist left, like, why the socialist left doesn't have an appeal to the Black, militants, because they're seen as just kind of like, we'll read Marx and Lenin and whatever and talk about the revolution. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why. I think there's a lot of factors, like objective factors, like Black people kind of have harder lives and can't commit themselves, to be full-time revolutionaries and whatnot. And, but I also think a lot of it is political, and not having like a real program that connects to Black people, and if you're not having that and trying to make a road directly to the Black masses and taking up these questions, then you're never going to make a revolution. Like that's just kind of what it is. You can't make a revolution without winning a good amount of Black people in this country, and understanding how central this question is to the American Revolution. I think that's where the class reductionist thing comes on. Because when I first got political, I wasn't looking towards like communism as an answer. Like I thought, main reason I thought communism was for white people. Like, what does this have to do with Black oppression? Okay, class, but what does this have to do with me, like, being Black and all that? And I think that's what a lot of Black people think too. Like, okay, we're all the same class, but I'm Black. There's clearly a difference here. Like, come on, we live in America. We know what this is. Like, we know what Black oppression is. And so to pretend that everything's just class, like, of course, yeah, class is the main divine line of society. We know that. But like that there's other things don't exist. Like the Black oppression is not a key thing to take up, especially in America. It's a little nutty, and it makes the left look like they're not serious. They don't have something to offer to Black people. And then Black people have to drop demands to their oppression to basically appease white people. That's honestly what it is, to not come off divisive, you know? Instead of saying what we've been arguing, is that white people have an objective interest in championing, white workers have an interest in championing Black oppression to better their own conditions, not out of this moralist obligation, like to have goodness in their heart. But in order to get out of their shitty situation, they have to fight to liberate Black people, because that will just bring better conditions for everybody. But I don't think that's how the left approaches it. It's either approached in a very liberal way, or it's not taken up because it's divisive and they just want to be class reductionist.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing your own experience and how you came to politics. I think that's really interesting. It gives you a real window into how the political problems in the American left show up in terms of the composition of that left. I think that's quite interesting. I'd never thought of it that way.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that our org has a lot of white people, but we have, this perspective, to try to win and fight, to get, Black Trotskyist cadre in this organization, because we know that's the only way we're going to make a revolution in this country. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of patience. But without having the correct program, it's already a no-go,
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is why this article is actually such a key contribution to like the left in the US, but actually I can see its relevance for the relevance of maybe not, of course, the particular history, but the framework, the way you approach this question for other societies. I mean, in the course of this whole discussion, I've been thinking about, like, for example, caste divisions in South Asia. What you get is this whole liberal perspective of moralism and all of that, and how that ends up like basically cannibalizing, the oppressed and the working class, where they see each other as the enemy. I appreciate that. But yeah, I think this is such an important intervention to try and do that, to try and win over Black militants to the perspective of communism as a means of rebuilding the Black movement, because that's really what's needed, especially as, Trump's taking a sledgehammer to everything. And yeah, DEI was never our perspective. It's not what Marxists are for, but still, like, those are racist attacks, and those do need to be fought. And the fight for that, again, cannot take place on moral grounds of like, and, Democratic Party tied, whatever perspectives. So I really appreciate that you've gone back, like, all the way to the civil rights movement to really pick up on this thread of how at each turn, it's not so much due to the sort of like how good or bad in their minds a given leader is, or whatever, but that it's their whole political outlook, whether that's MLK's pacifism or the, very cool anti-imperialist militant whatever of the Panthers, but that so long as it's not centered on the independence of the working class, it's gonna not advance the Black struggle in a fundamental way. And I like how you summed it up. If I can actually just read it out, this is how you start to conclude your article. So you write, liberals have fed right-wing reaction by, among other things, driving a wedge between the working class and oppressed groups. They preach tolerance, while pitting different sectors of the oppressed against one another in a scramble over an ever shrinking pool of resources. This only breeds resentment and division and has caused the working class to shift to the right. And I think that really nicely sums up, especially the last couple of decades, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of what we've seen play out. You see economic situation, which is going to get worse. You see the working class, which is turned to the right. And not just the white working class, you had even like Black and Latino
Mm-hmm.
workers vote Trump. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
getting bad out there. So we're in a bad position. And I think the left does need to go back to the drawing board and draw those lessons that you've tried to lay out here. I want to maybe start concluding this discussion by asking you to, I don't know, paint a picture of how to go forward.
Yeah, like you're saying, like we're in a really bad position right now. The Black struggle is non-existent. The left has only alienated itself more and more from the working class, and there's massive attacks going on. So I think what needs to happen going forward is that these lessons need to be learned. Black militants, who I was my audience in writing this, and my head was for, need to, I think, really turn to the working class and really do serious work of trying to win them over to, our perspective. And that doesn't mean you have to tolerate any racist bullshit or whatever, but it means we need to start laying the basis for communism to be like a real viable alternative to the working class. And that's going to take the left doing like hard work in the unions and whatnot in order to make this possible. And as with the Black struggle, we need to really, it needs to be rebuilt like desperately. Black people are under the gun. And, one of the things we've been doing was their Open Police Archives campaign. But other things we would like to do is reach out to the Black community and try to do more involvement work there. In order to really show, like, in order to rebuild the Black movement, it needs to be built on a completely different basis. It can't be tied to these liberal politics anymore. We need to, advance a fight against the ruling class. That should be our perspective in everything that we're doing and try to win people to this perspective. Again, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be hard. It's going to be, tedious, and patience that is needed. But I think that's the only way to be able to advance anything. Like, we're already in a very bad spot. And I feel this urgently needed to defend ourselves. And I think kind of all of history shows that.
Yeah. So one question coming off of what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in our in a lot of what we write, we talk about sort of the mood in the
Mm-hmm.
working class. Like, of course, there's a general rightward shift, but there's also this like mood that you got to put your head down and like people are not really up for like waging a real fight right now. I'm wondering
Mm-hmm.
how that's playing out right now. Like you mentioned like your perspective is to actually start intersecting like Black communities and like actually make real links, some of which you have been doing with the Open the Police Archives campaign, trying to rebuild, connect with families of like victims of cop violence. I'm wondering, what is the mood? Is there a willingness to fight, or is there more of like just like defeat? Like, what is actually the mood of Black America?
I think a lot of it is honestly defeat, and demoralization. I think you could tell because how small like a lot of these protests are or whatnot. But also just talking to people, it's more like we need to keep our head down. Racism will never end. It's just a thing that's going to keep happening. The best we can do is try to, build up the Black community, and that's really the most you can do. So it's a very like, yeah, a very like a defeated mood. Like, this is just what you got. This is American society. It's always going to be like this. So what can you do? And like with DEI and the chopping block, there hasn't been like mass protests like when I think affirmative action was attacked back in the day. It's kind of just like, yeah, we live in this racist, terrible society. Of course, Trump is going to tear up our rights. Like, but there's no real push, I guess, to get up and do something. It's almost just like you have to make the best out of what you got. Try to stay out of the line of fire. Try to hold on to stuff and not lose as much as you can. But to that mood, I just want to say, like, I understand where it comes from, but like, Trump is already on the rampage, just trying to keep your head down and stay out of the way. Well, Trump is making sure everybody gets in the way. Like, that there does need to be a defense, and it requires someone, sticking their neck out a little bit. or else
Yeah.
you're just going to be crushed. Like, it can get worse, you know? You're only just seeing the beginning. So I think it's even more necessary for, you know, Black people to fight back and try to, like, right now, try to fight to rebuild, like, the Black movement to just defend ourselves. I feel like that's kind of most basic self-defense thing ever right now, in order to actually hold on to what we have, you know, and make sure things don't get worse.
I think that's quite, I don't know, depressing, sobering.
It's sad. Yeah.
Yeah. But I appreciate that context, that texture of what's going on in the country right now, to again then step back and like look at what we're trying to do with this publication. This relaunch of Black history comes at a really crucial time for you know, the working class and the oppressed. And I think you guys have made a really valuable contribution to the task at hand. And I hope that this ignites some debates, some discussions in the left. We'll see.
Hopefully. I hope so.
Yeah. I think that's much needed. Yeah, I hope. But no, again, I want to end by congratulating you. I think this is a really excellent and powerful piece of propaganda that we now have to go out and do our work with. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for officially being the first person who did 2 episodes in a row. I appreciate you, your time, and yeah, okay, bye.
Well, I ain't got no smoke, at least not with you. And I don't know if you don't know, but there are just a few of oligarchs and capitalists profiting massive profits, holding us down in lockstep. And your vote, it ain't gonna stop